Gnaka Lagoke, Associate Professor at Lincoln University, Professor of History and Pan-African Studies. Thank you so very much for
Thank you very much.
joining us.
It's a pleasure to be in your presence.
What South Africa is going through at the moment, being labeled Afrophobic, xenophobic, Ivory Coast, your home country, has been through before. And it was because of the success of Côte d'Ivoire at a certain point in its history, economic success. But when that success dwindled, when the economy dived, then questions started to be asked about migrants who had moved into Côte d'Ivoire, many migrants from Guinea, from Mali, from Burkina Faso. So I want you to talk to us about this moment and how you experienced a similar moment.
As we know, the French organized the colonial system in Africa through two colonial federations, French West Africa and French Equatorial Africa. As Ivory Coast is in West Africa, so I'm going to focus on the French West Africa. So during the colonial time, Dakar was the capital of that French West Africa. And William Ponty, one of the biggest schools, was here producing leadership, for people who were going either to serve the colonial system or who were going to be the leaders of independent Africa. Ivory Coast, my country, was chosen to be the economic hub of French West Africa. So there were cocoa and coffee plantations. And then with the support of the colonial authorities, people were migrating from Mali, French Sudan by then, Upper Volta, now Burkina Faso, and then to go to Ivory Coast and work there in the cocoa farms.
It's almost like the gold that led the citizens of neighboring countries to come to South Africa.
And then, so that was the history of Ivory Coast. And then in the 30s, those who feel that they were the owner of the lands organized and put together a movement. In French, we say autochtone, the people who are
indigenous,
the indigenous people of the land.
Yeah.
In the 30s.
Yeah.
So since the early years of the formation of Ivory Coast as a colony, we've been battling with that debate.
Who is Ivorian?
Who is Ivorian or the indigenous versus versus the migrants?
Yes.
And now when in 1958, an Ivorian guy called Pepe Paul decided to organize, same thing that you guys are experiencing.
Match and match.
Oh, listen, same thing. 58.
Same kind of thing.
And then after the migrants. 58, before 1960. And later on, Ivory Coast became independent. And then that tension never faded away. And
it erupts periodically.
Recurrently.
Like what we're seeing in South Africa.
Same thing. And then there was even a concept of ivoirisation. Ivoirisation des cadres. In other words, they wanted the same way people say Africanization of the elite. In Ivory Coast, we were talking about the Ivorianization of the elite, or people of the cadre who were going to work in the administration. When Mr. Ouattara, the current president, when he became the prime minister of the country, and he's coming from the northern part, when I say the northern part, I'm talking about the Great North.
Yeah.
And then it was documented that his parents or himself, he has taken the citizenship of Upper Volta.
Burkina Faso.
Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
And then he was appointed the prime minister of Ivory Coast. But before he became the Prime Minister of Ivory Coast, our Constitution of 1990 allowed non-Ivorians to vote in the general elections in Ivory Coast. This is thing people don't know. So the first president of Ivory Coast who somehow supported Pan-Africanism, Elenon fought against it. We don't know why. So he was allowing all those people to be part in Ivory Coast, but he did not organize it. And people had the feeling that they were smothered by the migrants. So the concept of ivoirité, which in the beginning was used as a cultural concept, now was going to be imbued with a divisiveness between the northerners and the indigenous people of Ivory Coast. This is how we had our civil war in Ivory Coast. So when Ivorians now were saying that Mr. Ouattara could not and should not be the president of Ivory Coast, so we heard the campaign from Mr. Ouattara and from the Europeans who contributed to that to say that Ivorians were xenophobic people. As an Ivorian and as a Pan-Africanist, I did not agree with the label of calling to call Ivorians xenophobic people, but it was how Ivorians were portrayed almost everywhere.
How do you read the situation in South Africa? Some have called it xenophobia, Afrophobia. What's your analysis of what's going on?
I'm going to go a little bit deep. Is that when even though I appreciate what Malema said about Pan-Africanism, everything, but when I heard Malema talk about borderless Africa, in the light of the experience in Ivory Coast, for me, I think he was not sensitive enough about the plight and the cry of South Africans, even if they were using some means that we may decry. Because,
why do you say that?
Because Ivory Coast, it is 322,000 square kilometers. Even if we want to talk about the United States of Africa, we cannot have, let's say, 5 million Nigerians out of the 200 million to go and live in Ivory Coast. They are there already. Do you understand? And then if we think that people can come from Burkina Faso and then from Mali, and they're going to be living in Ivory Coast, in a country where Ivorians have the feeling that they've been deprived from the rights to own land and properties, for me, it is not sustainable, that way of doing things. What is happening in South Africa is that even though we may not like it, but it is an opportunity for discussion. So this is what I can say, to answer your questions.
What should we be discussing? No, the root causes, what is it that we should be discussing?
We can discuss the root causes, we can discuss bad governance, we can discuss corruption, we can discuss... Let me give you an example. When people were trying to go after the migrants in my country, and by the way, there's one thing people did in my country, when Gbagbo, the former president of Ivory Coast, was asking the people, not to allow foreigners to vote in Ivory Coast, it was labeled xenophobic by the ruling party, which wanted to use the migrants to stay in power. So, and then eventually they changed that element in the Constitution. Then one thing that we saw is that Ivorians were giving papers to people who were coming from Burkina Faso. I myself, as a journalist, I investigated that, and I spoke with a friend of, it's not a friend, I spoke with somebody who said that he knows one person who made sure that he got a birth certificate, even though the person is not an Ivorian. But the person got a birth certificate from Ivory Coast, and the person got an ID card from Ivory Coast as an Ivorian, and the person was involved in the process.
those are some of the accusations that our Home Affairs officials are facing at the moment.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
facilitating
because
the illegal stay
yeah, this is what they do.
of people.
This is part of the reality. And now even the Ivorian passport. There are many people you may have heard who are dying in the sea through the Mediterranean. There are many of them have the Ivorian passport.
Fraudulently so.
Yes. I will not say all of them, but many of them, yes. So that is the reality. So for me, for this to be resolved, we need people with integrity, people who care about the needs of the people. Because guess what? Even if I care about Africa, even if I believe in Pan-Africanism, if in a country where many people are already on welfare, I'm not going to be supporting an exodus or a massive migration towards that region. In other words, if Ivory Coast does fix its problems, Senegal does fix its problems, or Ghana, then we can think about a possible way of living together in a better way. But this, we need to have that kind of conversation.
How would you respond to those who say Ivorians or South Africans are speaking from a position of privilege, that their economies are better off than their neighboring countries' economies?
You were going to make me say something that I was going to regret, but it is not our fault. It is not the fault of Ivorians to be. It is not like Ivory Coast. The Ivorian. It's not like the Ivorian president made sure that the rest of West Africa failed like in the development project. It's not that. South Africa did not do that. All of us, we know the history of South Africa. It was built like in the 40s, 50s, 60s by a regime that was driven by the philosophy of apartheid. And then Black South Africans were not particularly privileged. They had to suffer and struggle, but even if it was with the support of many in the world, including African countries and people in the diaspora. But we cannot blame. And that is also, it's going to take me to another conversation. I don't like to talk like that about Africa, but hey, if a few can prosper in our midst, we don't have to go and destroy them, and we don't have to have a sense of entitlement, but we have to take responsibility and see how we can to replicate the same thing in our respective region. This is what I think.
Why is the question not asked why these governments have failed their own people? Why is that not a debate?
Because it is easy to blame others. It is easy to say that South Africans are lazy, because I heard some people on some talk shows say that they're lazy, they're not doing work. But it is easy to blame South Africans. Like I said, I'm not saying that I agree with what is happening, the way it is being done. I do not agree with that. But I will not talk about that, even though the March on March people are using some means that I do not agree with. But we're not going to respond to that with hatred. I've already spoken about that like that on some talk shows already. But the burden is on South Africans. The burden on South Africans, those who are not taken to the streets to do the March on March, but who may have sympathy with the people in the street, who may denounce the means that people are using, who believe on a better Africa, who think that there should be accountability from the African migrants or the African governments, to engage the debate. Because if you stay over there in your corner and then you say, okay, the people that hate us, and then you're going to have more bitterness, it's not going to resolve the issue. But if you start, I'm telling you, if you start that debate, those who in South Africa will think the way I'm thinking, and then I know many of people who think like the way I'm thinking, we're going to have a serious debate, and then maybe we can chart a new course in order to salvage the relationship. Because at the end of the day, when this is gone, at the end of the day, in 5 years, in 10 years, or in 100 years, we will be still on the same continent, and we need to find a way to do things together. That's my position. And that's one of the reasons why we will talk about that. That's one of the reasons why I can talk about Ubuntu now in the context. When people say, oh, why you talk about Ubuntu, a country that produces Ubuntu, but look at what they're doing.
They've abandoned Ubuntu.
They want Ubuntu, and why you talk about Ubuntu? But it's not because some priests and some pastors and some imams are doing some despicable things that we're going to think that there is no beauty and virtue in Christianity or in Islam. So that's my position.
So where do you see this, as you've described, what happens in Ivory Coast, that it flares up and dies down and flares up and dies down until there's some kind of long-term or permanent resolution to the crises that produce this kind of outcome?
Yes. So for me, I'm hopeful. And then, but one of the positive things, because I try to always see things I try to see opportunity in tragedy. The good thing is that the South African government has to take more responsibility to try and deal with the fraudulent migration to South Africa. They have to take responsibility to try and cater better to the needs of the people. And it's an opportunity for those African countries not to blame South Africa, while in their own respective countries, they are not doing better than South Africa. And then with the same sentiment does exist. Like you heard people in Senegal, people started that. No, it's not even now though, like a couple of years ago. I heard them going after migrants. And even Usman Sonko, when he was even before he became prime minister, he was already talking about that. Do you understand? So in my country, yes, people are waiting for the opportunity because they're waiting for the opportunity to go after the migrants. I'm telling them that is not the solution. You cannot go after the people who come from Mali, Burkina, and Niger. There is a way to resolve the issue. You cannot go after the Lebanese. You can't do that. This is not how you build a country. Because at the end of the day, when you destroy the corporation of the economy held by the Lebanese, who have been there for so long, that's not the way forward. But we need to have the conversation, and then we need to have a more dynamic conversation about this, not with hatred and not with bitterness, not by pointing finger at each other, but as an opportunity for a better dialogue, for a better future of the African nations.
You've studied and you specialize in Ubuntu philosophy. Many people are saying that South Africa has thrown Ubuntu out the window. Tell us what your understanding of Ubuntu, actually that's how it's pronounced, Ubuntu is.
When I was young, coming from the university, some people would say, for instance, I'm Mitterrandian. Mitterrandian meaning that they were claiming the socialism developed, advocated by François Mitterrand, who was the former president of France. Some other people were talking about Rocardien, meaning that they were claiming the philosophy of Rocard, also a variant of socialism. Some other people were saying that they were Stalinians, claiming Joseph Stalin. And some other people were claiming Maoism. And then one day, I say, you know what, you guys have been talking about all those ideologies. Is there any African ideology? They told me that they don't know. Even though I loved Mandela when I was a teenager, when I was growing up, but I never heard about Ubuntu but it became the quest of, not Ubuntu, but an endogenous African value system became the quest of my soul. And then when I went to the United States to study, into the PhD program, and I spoke to Dr. Wilfred David from the Caribbean, and I told him my idea of writing about Pan-African public policy in line with the regional economic integration. And this is what he told me. The policies that are designed or articulated have to be embedded in the value systems of the people for whom they are articulated or designed. The Chinese have Confucianism. Eastern Europe, they have socialism. Western Europe, they have capitalism. Africa, it is about time for us or for you guys to claim Ubuntu. That was the first time in 2002 that I heard about Ubuntu. And then when I went and I heard and I read, then I knew that this is what I've been looking for all those years. So
tell us what you understand Ubuntu to be.
Yeah, what I understand about Ubuntu, it is a paradigm about the African identity. It is a paradigm about the Pan-African consciousness. It is as the ability for us to think about a new future of Africa, how to live together. So this, and then when I saw the values, consensus, love, sharing, integrity, dignity, when I saw all those values, I told myself, this is what I was looking for. Now I can think about my understanding of a Pan-African regional economic integration based on the Ubuntu philosophy. This is how I wrote my dissertation, which I defended in 2009. So even though I claim Pan-Africanism, Kwame Nkrumah claims scientific socialism, but when it comes to the adoption of an ideology around which to think about the national building process and about the unity of Africa, I distance myself from capitalism and from scientific socialism, and I claim Ubuntu. So this is what we've been doing, friends of mine, friends and I. This is what we've been doing, and then thank God, because it is our personal legend. It's like according to what Paulo Coelho wrote in his book, when you are pursuing your personal legend, the universe conspires to make it happen. So when I see people, I was in Ghana as I was doing my conference, and then somebody said, "Oh, yeah, Gnaka, we have the same thing here." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes." Irene Ado. She said, "Yes." "Really?" She said, "Yes." I said, "What is the name?" This is when I heard Ubuntu, like Ubuntu in South Africa. And then when I met somebody from one of my colleagues from Igbo origin from Nigeria, he said, "Yes, we call that Nmamundu." And then, can you imagine? So this is how people have been teaching me. And only for me to read the book of Jordan Gubane, Conflict of Minds, who was the first African or South African to articulate Ubuntu as a philosophy. Nmamdu was written in his book, can you imagine?
Wow.
In the 60s. So these are the things that we are uncovering, we are discovering in our quest in order to position Ubuntu. So yes.
And you said here in Senegal,
They call that Nite here. Yeah, they call that here Nite in Senegal. So what could be, for instance, some features of the Ubuntu economy?
Yes.
The first element, yes, everyone talk about social justice. Yes, people have to understand that the same way we live in our communities, when you are working on your farm and the entire village comes and helps you work on your farm, that is the spirit that was supposed to be promoted, because people should not depend on the state, because it is not sustainable to be on welfare permanently. In other words, people have to claim the ownership of their own development, their own economic freedom. So that is the beginning of the conversation. In other words, if we need a better organization, people, they come together, they do what they have to do, and each community has to build its health centers, its schools, its roads, and then many other things. Each community, that's the responsibility of each community. This is what people are doing in the United States.
African citizens would ask, where would we get the money? Where would we get the resources to do this?
In Africa, we have a way of mobilizing funds. In French, we call that tontine. that today the Europeans are using, and we seem to be thinking that it's something that they again bring into Africa, that's what they call crowdfunding.
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 We know how to do that.
We know how to do that. And then in the context of South Africa, my friend Pasika Farumele, he was the one who shared the information I'm sharing with you. He told me about you guys with the Afrikaners, Stokvels. That's the word, right? So we have all those mechanisms. And then even in Senegal here, the Mourids, like a self-sustaining community, providing funds for some popular projects. So we have things like that on the continent of Africa. The only problem is that the leaders who fail their own people and then who are complicit of some corrupted or some corrupt migration are the same one who do not know how to think in order to mobilize those funds. And so Cameroon, for instance, people can put, I know you guys have the same example in South Africa among Black people. People can put their monies together. And another element, instead of putting money together for funeral, that money can serve for some projects for people who are still living. So in other words, there should not be a problem to get the funds. And then we can even have some banks, when people come together, some communities come together and they put their monies together, and then when they can even have, banks can be created in order to host those resources, and then that can be, in French you say, bankable projects. Do you understand? So money should not be an issue.
And this would happen over time.
Over time.
It's not something that happens overnight.
Yes, overnight. So not only that, but I can tell you, there are people, when they have a problem, people can come together and put together $100,000. People do that in Ivory Coast.
We see it with funerals. I mean, there's no lead time warning or anything like that when a funeral happens.
When I went to the United States, I was so shocked. When I saw there was a Nigerian who was dead, and then who died, and then one night. But it was one of my first shockers in the United States. Everyone came together and they put together like $25,000 for that person because they liked the person. Ask the same Ivorians to put together the same amount of money in order to sponsor the scholarship of one of the children. They will not do that.
They won't. Why?
Because they believe more like in the solidarity around funerals, and because of the mentality that they have, and because leaders are not there to tell them how to do a paradigm shift. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
but the leaders want to be the providers,
they want to,
that
of course,
they can get the votes.
Right? That's the issue. So my point is that if I were to be close to somebody who is in power, come on, really, people will be shocked to find money in the African communities. The money is there. It is not well used. That is the problem that we have. I'm not saying that if we want to send a space shuttle in the air, that we're going to have enough money to do that. But I'm talking about building like a small medical center in the city, in a rural area.
Or fixing windows in a school or something, because we're always waiting for government to fix those things.
And then when we see like the dirt in the streets, we're not going to wait for the government to do that. So we have to take responsibility, and like I said in the beginning, the communities have to take into their own hands their own destiny and the instruments of their own economic freedom. Build roads, schools, and then many other elements. So yes, so this is what I want to say.
Thank you so very much. I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, Prof.
Thank you very much.